end up saying too much about Chapter 10 today. The main thing is simply because Bootstrap 4 gives us a lot of that functionality for supporting mobile, which is what Chapter 10 is about. So a lot of the stuff that we do for dealing with mobile devices, we're going to do using Bootstrap 4. So what I'm going to open up here is under the Pro ASP.NET from the book. I'm going to open up the Chapter 10 project here. So we can have that open. Yep.
Can we go over the shipping details saving too as well?
We can. What did you have as far as questions there on about the shipping details?
I mean,
do you have anything specific?
I'm getting an exception, but when we save it, we have the model of that view, the checkout page is the shipping details, and that's being passed when we save the order. That model is being passed to that method when we save it, right?
Okay.
So when we do the DB, that shipping details that add to the database table, we can just pass that original model that we got from the controller, right?
In theory, yeah.
Yeah, and then we just do the await DB that save changes.
Right. So add and then save changes. Yeah.
I'm just getting a fat exception, and
okay.
I'm not sure where to go.
Let's look at it after class.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Because I don't know that everybody will be having the same issue.
Okay.
So I want to pull up Chapter 10. We'll take a look at this. So obviously mobile devices are a big deal. We want to kind of be able to support mobile devices with our websites as much as we can, but we also want to be able to do that as seamlessly as we can. Okay, so there's a few different three different approaches that he breaks it down to as how you can kind of deal with the problem. And one option he gives up here as well, don't do anything, which there are still websites out there that just don't support mobile. That's not really the approach you probably want to take for most websites, but that does exist. There are websites that still don't support mobile. The other way to go about it is to use responsive design, which you've kind of gotten a familiarity with Bootstrap already. There's a third set of tools in here that he gives, which is to kind of show different content to mobile devices. That tool is out there. Unfortunately, that's kind of, to be honest, it's kind of a lot of work to do it that way. Simply because now you're saying, well, let's rebuild the entire page for a mobile device, right? And now as soon as you start doing that, especially if you start switching the whole website over to that, now you're effectively supporting two different websites. And every time you add something new or make a change, now you have to make it in two places, right? So the big benefit of responsive design, right, is that we can make a change one place or make a little change and it kind of works both sides. Does that make sense? Kind of works regardless of what your screen size is. The other thing that happens there, so the mobile switch that they put in is simply based on it detecting that you're quote-unquote mobile. It has nothing to do with your screen size. So you could have a tablet that's got a 1080p screen, and it's still going to run you with the mobile website, even though a desktop website might be a good fit for you. It's not based on the screen width. So we'll look a little bit at those tools, but to be honest, I won't ask you to use any of the mobile-specific stuff for this class, simply because I'd much prefer that you do it through Bootstrap 4. Okay, so if we look at how the website kind of falls in, let me turn off the lights back here. If we look at how the website looks sort of from a mobile's perspective, you can see how he's laid it out. There's a few different problems. First of all, you've kind of got Well, you've got a lot of space being taken up here by the logo. You can see that this information is dropping down below. Your cart, yada yada. That's not necessarily flowing the way we want it to. And you can also see, hey, well, a lot of space here is being taken up by that nav bar because he's done it as a sidebar, right? Now, how did we implement that when we went through those category filters? Remember, we implemented those as tabs. So he has a way that he kind of changes that up and makes it desktop be on the side, and on mobile be kind of on the top as tabs. Well, I would recommend we just keep it as tabs for all sides. So I'm kind of going to be skipping over that. If you want to read through that part, how he does that, be my guest. But I would say it's probably best to not have a sidebar in the first place, simply because then you have a lot of things that you have to change between desktop and mobile. So this is how those kind of things fall out. So we want to make some improvements there, and the first thing we want to go through and do is kind of make the header work a little bit better, make the navbar work a little bit better. Okay, so if we look at, let me open up our project where we're at. Let's see, where is it? No, not that one. There it is. So that's where we're at. There we go. So if we look at that here, I'm going to hit F12. I'm going to go into mobile so we can kind of see how things, currently, this is how things are working on our side, right? We've already made, in theory, some changes to the bootstrap. This is how it's working right now, okay? Well, the first thing we'd like to do is take the SportStore and kind of put it on 2 lines, right? Put the brand name, put it on 2 lines instead of 1. So if we go look at the layout file, here we've got that link, right? So it's just in an anchor tag, right? So how can I get that to show up on 2 lines instead of 1? Using Bootstrap 4. Because just a note, so the book gives one method to do it using these visible and hidden classes. Those do not exist in Bootstrap 4. Hidden and visible don't exist in Bootstrap 4. Okay, so those approaches, those classes that he used throughout chapter 10, those are not options for us. So we actually have to do something different because hidden and visible have been removed, and there's a reason for that.
Could you perhaps use a combination of row and column to set the two in between the words?
You mean using Flexbox kind of thing?
Yeah.
I can actually do something simpler than that, right? Remember that there's display modes, right? There's different display modes, and there's 3 that are of key interest to us, right? We can set things to display none, which means they're going to disappear. We can set things to display block, or we can set things to display inline, right? There's an important difference there between block and inline, which is what?
Blocks will take up the full width of their container.
Which means that things appear vertically, right? If I just put things into blocks, blocks appear vertically versus inlines appear horizontally, right? So if I take this, I'm going to put both of these into span tags, both words in the span tags. Okay. And if I apply class D block, so that'll make them both blocks. Okay, so wrap span around each word, make both of those a block. What we should see is that those go ahead and appear vertically. So you can see there, right? So just by putting those, making those blocks, those are now going to appear vertically instead of appearing horizontally. Now that's true. That's going to make them appear blocks regardless of what width the screen has right now, right? So I'm telling them to be blocks all the time, right? Now remember, with Bootstrap, is Bootstrap mobile first or desktop first?
Mobile first.
It's mobile first, right? So which means that the default styling that we apply needs to be what we want it to be for mobile, okay? So we want to say that it's D block normally, and then what we can do is to tell it to fall down to a different to an inline when it's a larger screen size. Open up this. So I want to say to fall down to an inline once we get up to a medium screen size. So on a mobile device, they're going to be blocks, and then on a medium or larger, they'll be inline elements.
I'm sorry, what did you say for medium or larger? Or
So this says for medium or larger, it's going to be inline. So D need inline. And there it goes.
It's see those three on the right and left of the lights, it's the middle one at the top.
You may need to update Windows on the other page.
Show me your SportStore database model. I'm not sure what I'm missing.
Okay. So that solves that problem. Hey, Scott, yes?
I have the symbol
So you have a setting there as well. What I would recommend, similar classes. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me show that real quick. So let's say we have an icon in there. Let's say you've already gone, because that's a good question. Let's say we've already gone and added a font awesome icon. So, font awesome. And let's say I'm using one of these. So I'm going to add in this icon. So let's say I have that there. Okay, this is a good question. So I say I have an icon there. All right, so if it's in line, it's all good, right? If I start going down to mobile, now it's vertically that way. Okay, that might be what I want, right? My other option is to try and get that icon to the left, right? But let's start with just leaving it. I would just start by leaving it that way, where it's just vertically, like that. So it's horizontal that way, vertical that way. If we run into a problem there, we can try to rejigger it. So the next thing I want to do is I want to get this to be more, or maybe work a little bit better on mobile, right? So this part here. Okay, so what do we do? Let's look at the book. Let's go see what he does. So, problem solved. What he's going to end up doing is trying to get it to look like this in mobile, which we're actually I think I'm mostly there. You'll notice that we put an icon in here. We'll notice that, okay, we're removing a little bit of extra text. And part of the way he does that is hiding the your cart text, yada yada. So let's see if we go back to here. And I'll look at cart summary. Now, your cart summary might look a little bit different than mine. Okay, that's okay, but it may look a little bit different than mine. So, the way I've got mine set up here, I've got an icon, I've got a span here for screen reader only, right? So, you may or may not have that. You may or may not have this. Why do I have that there? What's the purpose of me putting it there? Because as you can see, nobody can. It seems to be completely invisible, right? Yep.
That's information that somebody who can see the screen could infer just by looking at what it's referring to, but somebody who can't see the screen wouldn't know.
Right, because SR only stands for screen reader only, right? So if you're using a screen reader to read the screen out loud to you, it's going to read that text even though it's not visible to the user, okay? So let's say I want to take this, move this a little bit around. I'm going to move this icon in here actually. Right, so say I have some text here that I want to, so if I start with this way, I'll have the icon, I should have the icon and the text. Oh, darn it. Not the page I wanted to refresh. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to get in here. So remove the icon there, look at that. So sometimes I may want to have both an icon and some text in there, and that's usually best for desktop, is you want to usually have both. Just having one or the other can be not as user friendly. So we want to have both in there. But maybe what I want to do is hide that text past a certain screen point. Now remember we changed that display. Remember we changed that display method with the sorry, with the brand name, we just changed SportStore to be 2 lines or 1 by changing the display type. We can do a similar thing to hide the text based on the size of the screen. So I can say initially for mobile, I want it to be gone. So if I say D none, that means it will be gone by default, right? Be gone for mobile. And then what I want to do is bring it back for desktops. So I can say for mobile, it's gone with D none, and then I can say it's there for desktop. So D mead inline. Does that make sense? So what I'll see here, I should see just the icon. If I expand it up here, you'll see I see the icon and the text. Okay. Give you a chance to get caught up there if you're not caught up with everything that's on screen.
What first? I had shopping cart.
Just the name of the page. So that problem with the website.
Shoot for 5%.
It's not even right or wrong.
So remember the this right here on the wall, and you can see what it was.
That's the problem.
So you can see how it's going to show up on the wall. That makes sense. Did you get all that? Does anybody not have all this up here at this point? Caleb, you got that? Okay. So that's enough to fix the nav bar, right? So now we have a nav bar that works whether we're on mobile or whether we're on a desktop space. Okay. Now, what else do I see that might be a problem for mobile here?
Spacing of the products.
Okay. What do you mean space?
The all products, chess, soccer, water sports. Maybe make them vertical, I guess, or
I want to keep them horizontal because that would take up more space to make them vertical.
The list of products is getting squished.
Okay.
I mean, like,
Well, but where's that problem manifesting though? Okay, so it's shorter, right? So here we look at the list of products. Everything's fine. It's kind of where we want it to be, right?
is it the font size stays consistent as the screen gets smaller, so it's taking up more space in the container
Well, that's
relative to its size?
it is true that the font size is staying the same. Really, what I would say is here's the issue. Where did we originally intend for these two things to be? Originally, we intended for this to be left of there. We intended to add to cart kind of be at the bottom right corner or to the left of the description text, right? That was the intent, right? And if we look at the product summary, let's look at the product summary so we can see what the code's actually doing. So we've got an H3. Inside of that H3, we've got the price, and we're floating the price right. You see that? We're floating the price to the right. Similar thing, we've got the button here, and we're floating it to the right, right? So both of those things that are on the right, we're floating them, right? We're floating them. If you were pulling that from the book, that's how we had set those up, right? So you can see that floating gets very interesting once we go down to mobile, right? And this is a typical problem with floating. Floating oftentimes works great on, and well, if you can get it working, works great on a desktop. And very rarely does floating work well on mobile, simply because by floating it, remember you're pulling it out of the normal flow of the text, which usually means it doesn't follow where you would expect it, right? So if instead of floating it, we kept it in the main flow of the text, we might get some better behavior, right? We might get some better behavior. So what might we want to do for ordering these things? In this sense, well, maybe what we want to do for mobile is say, show the name first, and then beneath that show the price, beneath that show the description, beneath that show add cart. Think of it vertically, right? We probably want those things to appear vertically on a mobile device, right? So as long as we're floating, that's not going to happen, right? So we have to remove the floats. So let's look at the code and let's see what we can do by just removing some of those parts. So if I say, let's just remove this float right here, and I'm going to remove the float right there. Okay? So the only thing I've done there is stop them from floating. Okay? Let's see what that looks like on a mobile screen. So if I don't float them, I don't have that problem, right? It already behaves better if I simply don't float them, okay? If I simply don't float them in the first place, then the layout doesn't behave as badly when I go to mobile, okay? Now, what doesn't happen is it doesn't necessarily show up the same way now on the desktop, right? Okay, so what are my options? Do I have another option that I can use to get this badge to show up over here other than floating it? There's some other options that I can use for CSS is concerned.
Can you do like a column or something?
What do you mean a column?
Or a grid? Like have it in 2 columns and then have one push down to the right. I don't know the bootstrap.
So you want to use a bootstrap grid. This is actually not a good place to use a bootstrap grid because it's actually going to behave very badly.
Flexbox.
Flexbox. So Flexbox is actually a great tool. And one of the things to remember is grid is based on Flexbox, but there are cases where you need to go back to the Flexbox itself, like this, and use the Flexbox directly rather than using the bootstrap grid on top of it. Because the problem is, the main problem is, this width of that badge, it's going to change in size. Same thing with the text here. And if I start using the grid columns, I say, well, this needs to be so many columns, that needs to be so many columns. At some point, it's going to behave very oddly because those don't align neatly on grid columns. That makes sense? So instead of using grid columns, I'm just going to use Flexbox directly. Okay? So if I go back here, remember the first step is to make the container that you want to use Flexbox with, you need to make that a Flexbox container, right? So how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, we need to first say, okay, well, what? So we need to first say, these things are This is my container. What I'm going to do first, there's two different ways that we could approach this. What I'm going to try first is I'm going to make the H3 itself a flex box, because they're already inside of there. So let's say we try that. So change this to deflex. You don't need to necessarily copy on yet, because there's a few things we'll have to do to get this to work. But you can see, okay, not much changed immediately, except these two things just got closer, right? Now there's no spacing between them, right? Ideally, what I want there to be some space between there, and I want that to kind of grow to take up all the available space. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add in here another span, and I'm going to set this to flex grow 1, so that it's going to take up all the available space between those two items. Okay, so these two items are going to get whatever space that they need, and then this is going to take up all the space in between. Problem solved, right? So that's simply without using, that's just removing there. Now, you'll see as that gets smaller, I do have a problem there in the sense that it's not jumping down, right? It's no longer going down beneath it. In fact, this particular badge is getting up to the full height of that, right? So how can I solve that problem? How can I solve that problem to keep it from growing up to that full height?
Would you put a height on it?
Max height.
Well, if I put it, I could, but then I'd have to specifically tune that max height. Okay? I'd rather prefer it to only take up however much space it needs, right? So with Flexbox, remember there's a few more configuration options, right? Remember that there's some alignment settings that we can set. Remember there's the primary axis, the Crocs axis, and there's alignment properties for each of those, right? Now by default, that primary axis is set to line stretch, okay? By default it's set to line stretch, which means that everything's getting stretched to the tallest thing, okay? So if I just change that alignment, this badge will be at the top instead of being the full width of that. So to do that, I'm going to say flex. Let me see, align.
On the flex box.
Oh, you're right. Yes, I do. You're right. So align. I think it's align content start.
Maybe align items. It's kind of confusing which one.
Yeah, it's one of those two. Let me try this one first and see if this one does the one I want. It's align content or align. So it's not that one. Align. Yeah. Let's see, line item start. I think that might be the right one. There we go. So that problem solved so that they're not being stretched. I would still like it to jump down, right? I still would like it to jump down if I could. So one way to do that, remember there's a direction, right? There's a direction to that flex container. So if I were to say flex, I think it's flex column. Yeah, so if I just say flex column, you'll see that they're now vertical. But if I just do flex column, they're always vertical, right? I want it to only jump down when it needs to, right? So I probably want to have it specifically break at medium. So I'm going to do flex med column so that, or actually, no, I need it backwards. I need to do flex column so it's there on mobile, and flex med row because I want it to go up to row on desktop. There we go. So mobile, it's below. There, it's there. Okay. So that's one row fix. I'll let you go ahead and add those classes now. Add those two pieces. So that's the big part that changed. So can you see how that's different than using the flex columns, Graham?
Yeah.
Okay. And in some sense, it's actually easier than potentially setting up the columns because it just kind of figures itself out. I don't have to fine tune how many columns each width is. It just says take up how much you can. Whatever's left over, just stick it in this thing in between. So sometimes I have to have spacers like that. That's what we call that.
Can we look at this SQL database problem real quick?
It's not really related to what I'm doing, so I don't really want to. I'd rather have you on here what we're working on.
Okay.
So, sorry, but it's very off topic. So.
Right. I mean, I thought we had some downtime. That's why
Okay.
I asked if it wasn't.
No. No. So that's what we have there. So I also want to do the same thing with these pieces, right? So I want to ideally have the add to cart button be over here if it can, and otherwise have it drop down, right? So I want to have it over there if it can on desktop and drop it down below. So how can I do that? Well, looking at these two things, are those in a flex container right now? Or where could I apply the flex container?
On the form.
Well, but if I put it on the form, then I'm only applying it to this and I'm not applying it to that.
Would you put it on the card?
If I apply it on a card, then I'm also including that, right? So really, the only two things I want to be in there basically are this description and the submit button, right?
I have mine on float right on the button.
Yeah, you'll want to remove that. You'll want to remove that. So what I could do is I could wrap both of these in a div. That could be one approach. I could wrap both of those things in a div. That's one way to solve it. If I do that, I do run into maybe a little bit of a problem in the sense that the button and the text are still not at the same level. And ideally, I'd like them to be directly in the same flex container. So one option I can do is to say, move the description, move it into the form, right? If I move it into the form, that gives me, okay, now I can apply it to the form. Now I can change this to apply that class. So I do have to add in the post argument, and I can say at class. So on a similar note, I'm going to make these deflex and de-align item start. As a starting point. And then what I want to do, rather than adding a spacer in this time, I want to actually have the description grow and take up any available space. So I'm actually going to apply that flex row 1 to the description. And I actually probably want the same thing here too. So let's see if that works. So on desktop, I'm getting the button over here. If I kind of gradually shrink it down, you can see that on mobile it's jumping down because now it's a column. So that's just a general, advice. If you want to get it to work mobile, don't use float, use Flexbox, because that's usually the right solution for the problem. Questions there on the Flexbox parts? Is there anything left on the website that doesn't work well on mobile? Okay, looking through it, is there anything left on the website that doesn't work well? Okay, so what's happening on the checkout page?
The buttons at the bottom don't look right.
Let's go here. Let me actually just add something to the cart first. So they're looking like this, at least for me. If I go to mobile, so I'm getting them that way. Is that what you're getting as well? So what do you mean? You said what?
So they're just kind of close.
They're just kind of close together. So how might I solve that problem to get them a little bit farther away?
That's a mark.
That's a mark, right? So that's an easy thing to fix. If we go to that view, so I'm going to go up to the card index page. There's the two buttons that we have. I'd want to say just add some margin to the actual button. So maybe M2 on both. Problem solved. Yep.
I'd say the logo for looks pretty off.
This part? So what could we do to maybe have that disappear on mobile? Have the icon disappear on mobile?
The same thing we did with that text on the shopping cart, I think, is what it
Mhm.
was. It was D none for mobile, and then was it D block ND?
So I'd apply that on the icon here. Yeah, so we could say D none, D MD inline. So if I add that, yeah, that would make it disappear and then come back on desktop. Problem solved.
I see the shutdown, or sorry, the product summary one. which I'm missing on it, but.
So product summary. You have a hand up, Ben? Okay. So most of the time, that's all it's a matter of just applying some different display types, for mobile versus desktop. That's usually all we need to do to make it work. Now, another option that they do give us, one option that we can take with MVC, if we for whatever reason need to have a different version between mobile and desktop, different version of the layout, we can do that. So the way that works out, so I've got my underscore layout here, right? Do build. So I've got my underscore layout here. What I can also do is add another file. It's called underscore layout.mobile.mobile.cshtml. So if you have a file that's there in the same folder, same name, just with a .mobile at the end, it will use that instead if it detects that there's a mobile device. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like here. Okay, so here I've got it on the desktop version. I need to actually add the data in. Let me fix that real quick. So I've got sync, pull, let me add that data. And go back here. I need to connect to the database. This particular one's running on localhost, local DB. So where's my connection string? So I'm looking at my web config, and I should have my connection string in here somewhere, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, I'm on the wrong project. I'm on the wrong project. Let me go to the book. There, okay, there's the book project. There we go. So they've got using local DB, so I need to connect to local DB, add connection, there, SportStore. Okay, tables, show table data.
Should we do this or no?
You don't need to do this. This is I'm running off the book project, and I just need to fill in the data with the database with some data because it was empty. There we go. Okay, so that's where I wanted to be. So there we've got the regular layout. Here's what it looks like on desktop. And if I switch it to mobile, first of all, hey, here there's no immediate change, right? I'm looking at it in mobile here. There's not an immediate change. If I refresh, notice how all of that's changed. So now it's using that .mobile layout and those other .mobile files.
Is this a substitute from using like a media query in this CSS file?
So the thing to know here, so if I'm using media queries, Bootstrap 4 uses media queries. If I'm using media queries, that's run on the server or is it run on the client?
It's run on the client.
It's run on the client. It's run in the browser. So if I'm using responsive design, I'm running the logic in the client. Okay. The server generates the same code regardless of whether you have a mobile device or whatever device you have, right? This is different, okay? So using these .mobile files, the switch is done on the server side. Okay? The switch is done on the server side.
So, but for Bootstrap, it's the same as if you just were to make your own.
Yeah, it's just as if you're using media queries. It's run on the client side. But if you use this will change it on the server side. More often than not, client side is what you want, but there may potentially be cases where you need, for whatever reason, to have that switch be on the server side. So if you need to have that switch be on the server side, what we can see here, you see there's layout, and then there's layout.mobile. We can see a similar thing, product summary.mobile. It will automatically, if it detects that you're running on mobile, on a smartphone, it will automatically grab all the mobile ones that are available and swap those in and use those instead. Does that make sense? So that's one tool you can use, but I would really prefer that you use Bootstrap for that. But that's really all you have to do. If you want it to have that switch on the server side, you just provide two different files, your regular desktop file and your mobile file. Questions there? And that's why I had to do a refresh here. So remember, I had to refresh to actually get an update. If I jump out of here, see it's still running the mobile version because that switch is done on the server. So it'll only switch between mobile and desktop that way if I refresh the page.
If you were to if you were to start on the mobile, move back to desktop, then hit one of your add to cart button, it would automatically switch back to the desktop.
Right. So right now, I'm basically in the desktop and say add to cart. Now, because it's grabbing a new file from the server is now presenting it with the mobile version. So anytime you go to the server is going to say, are you mobile or desktop at that time? And that's basically controlled by whether or not you have this clicked as far as the emulation is concerned. Now, if you're on an Android device, you're always going to get this version, right? Regardless of what you click, basically.
Well, there's a setting for browsers on phones so you can get the desktop site.
Yeah, so in theory, that should switch this between those two, between the desktop and the mobile. So that is an option there if you want, if for some reason you need things to be drastically different. But I would recommend as much as possible to just use Bootstrap for it. So that's all that there is for Chapter 10. Want to kind of follow up with you now to see where you're kind of at, and see where everybody at with the labs. We'll start tomorrow with Chapter 11, which is going to be to add administrative pages, so you can add products and edit them and things like that. And then Thursday we'll get into Chapter 12, which is going to add kind of a login for that. So that you can control who has access to those admin pages. So those are the other two pieces for this week. Friday will definitely be a lab day, and then next Monday we'll do the hands-on test over this stuff.
Could you bring up the code for the nav menu?
So you have a question about the nav menu?
Yeah, I know that didn't catch when you change the buttons around.
Yeah, so let me make sure I have the right one open. That's the one I want. So, menu.
Oh, so, okay, so notice that just the buttons for that were different. Was that just for the mobile project?
Yeah, that was just for the mobile project. So you can see how he did that in Chapter 10, and you can look at the Chapter 10 example code. He's switching that over in Chapter 10. He's actually using jQuery mobile. He's not even using Bootstrap in that version. So he's switching over to jQuery UI for mobile devices when he does those two different layouts versus using Bootstrap in both places, which makes things really a pain.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, so now I have to redo everything because I don't have Bootstrap on mobile. That's kind of going backwards, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening there.